such an accomplishment as this is unattainable. As I would not seem, in the words of the psalmist, there to tremble for fear where no fear was. I shall put forth for you more clearly what I think.
Explain there to tremble for fear where no fear was.
There to tremble for fear where no fear was.
It doesn't follow.
Yeah, the meaning doesn't seem to really jump off the page on that one. So let's start from the beginning. Maybe it'll help us figure this out at the end. So the perfect life, this word perfect, usually taken from the teachings of Jesus in the Gospels, part of the Sermon on the Mount, I believe, where he says, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." That's the English translation of this word. I have heard and read that maybe a better translation is the word complete or whole. Be complete or whole, perfect. So that is that might be a good starting place as we're like looking at this, is just to kind of agree on what the perfect life is. I think maybe the definition of perfect as we know it today, like from our place in time and our culture and things like that, we're in the scientific age. We're at a time where things are measured with exactness and perfection. Now, they also, people of the past, would have had to understand that to some degree. Like, if you look at the architecture of the Greeks and the Romans, they had to be very precise with their mathematics. And so that's one way to describe perfect.
Except those some of the guns didn't have the zero, so they were terrible at math. I just thought that was. My husband told me until the Arabs influenced Europe, they had a zero, and then
okay.
The Roman numerals have no zeros.
Interesting.
But they are scientific.
So that's one way, is like mathematically perfect is one way to talk about it. The other thing is like, if you look at a newborn baby and you say, it's perfect, she's perfect, he's perfect. So that's maybe that's a better way theologically to kind of land. Because otherwise, if we're looking at perfect, we would be looking at our lives in a mathematical sense. And the only way that we can do that is to have like a set of laws or standards with check boxes, and to grade ourselves, in that way. So, this is always tricky when it comes to behavior. I remember growing up, sometimes my mom would do different things. She didn't really stick with any one plan for raising us. She seemed to try different things, as time went on. But I remember one of the things was like, you get your list of chores for the week or something like that. And if you completed the chores and they get checked off, I don't know, we got a prize or a dessert or some kind of reward, Yeah, they didn't get kicked out of the house. So there's always this kind of line between what is absolute and what is opinion. What is, if the checkbox is clean your room, what's clean? And so there's always this in behaviors. There's always this thing of like, I guess what we would do if we're going to play this thing of mathematically perfect, we're going to have to describe the standards in a black and white way, right? I guess we could say thou shalt not kill, and you could tell, well, see, everything gets a little fuzzy,
Yeah,
you
go to
know?
war when you need to sometimes.
Don't kill, don't steal. Those seem black and white, but then there's always situations where it's like, well, did he really kill her? I mean, or did she really steal from him? So there's this has always been a little bit tricky. So when it comes to the perfect life, what is it that we're called to? What is it that, if we're supposed to be perfect, what does that mean? He is saying this is something that is beyond description and is unattainable. So that's one way to look at it, is that we are asked to do something, but we really can't be perfect. We're always going to kind of fall short, and God's grace or forgiveness will get us by.
The
That's-
other way is if what you're thinking is perfect is not what I'm thinking is perfect.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So that's why it's hard to use this term, because this term is really an absolute term. And perfect is absolute. And so when we bring absolutes into our behaviors or our faith or our way of thinking, it's like, how do we do that? So I don't know if that helps us. Many great men, those who excel in virtue, so they're good people, they will admit that for them such an accomplishment, becoming perfect as this, is unattainable. As I would not seem, in the words of the psalmist, there to tremble for fear where no fear was, I shall put forth to you more clearly what I think. I don't know. He's saying he's going to tell us more
Okay,
at the end
that's
there.
good.
Yeah. So
Well, I feel like the children kind of expresses it. I've been going through something. I was a modern parent for the times, but I never, my children could cry for an hour if they wanted something. That even made me dig my heels. You don't get it.
mm-hmm.
And Lila's mother's very energetic, and my granddaughter's Katie's energetic. And Lila wants something. She follows her around, and it's. I'm embarrassed for Katie and it's been a struggle for me to say what I've said, so they know what we're thinking. But then sometimes I find I'm so glad I live in modern times. On NPR radios, we're driving home from church. This person said, babies are born so self-centered, and the whole family's just them, and then they have to kind of be narcissistic because they need to have self-identity. And I thought, I've even thought of that, so I could say it's true, because it's something in my head said this is defining who Lila is. I don't want her to be passive like I was brought up to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to let go of old ways.
Yeah.
And allow her to be who she is. It was much more energetic than I'd ever dreamed of being.
What helps me is the idea of trade-offs. So there's not necessarily, there can be healthy and unhealthy ways to raise a child or to grow up. But then in the middle, there can still be differences in styles or in goals. They can still, I think, be healthy, but maybe sometimes I would prefer something that you would not prefer. And it's not, it does show itself generationally. A lot of times one generation of parents can be very different in general from the other. But it can also be like, I'm 4 years older than my next brother, and I was how old was I? 20, I was 34. I was 34 when Ian was born. But my brother, I think, was closer to 40 when his boys were born. Maybe that has something to do with it. I feel like we've raised our kids kind of differently. So the things that his kids are restricted from are things that mine were not restricted from, and vice versa. Things that they can get away with, I wouldn't let Ian get away with, So, but I think it's really that's just a thing of
Your value
trade-offs.
systems.
And it's trade-offs. It's like there are some certain things where you're kind of like, maybe you're lenient now, but somebody's gonna, if you're lenient now, maybe they're gonna pay for it later. If you're strict now, maybe they're gonna pay for it later. It's like everybody just kind of has to. We always end up needing therapy from the way that our parents raised us, all of us. And it's like what we need therapy from oftentimes is just like whatever way that they leaned, that's where we found our deficiencies. But that's also where we got our strengths too. There are some I feel like my parents gave me a good work ethic. So I'm a self-motivated person now. I don't have to have somebody watching me all day long to see if in fact, it bothers me if I'm in an environment where somebody's watching me do so. It's like, I can do this, but then there are other people. I mean, one of my good friends in seminary, same age as me, he was not motivated. He was the biggest procrastinator ever. Every single project and paper that we did for the 3 years of seminary, he was always rushing in the door at the last minute, and he stayed up all night, and he just waited till the end every single time. So, but I don't know. We're also different too, and it's like you can have siblings raised by the exact same parents, and it seems to have different effects on them. They come out with different personalities. So
I did get an add-on from that psychiatrist, whatever, therapist or whatever. He said what you're needing to do over time is you're needing to develop empathy. And I thought, well, rather than scolding them, it's the things that are taught that are empathetic that will balance out the narcissism.
Right. One of the things that I've been our son David went through his teenage years at the same time that our whole family was going through kind of a rough patch. So it felt like he kind of got a double whammy and had to adjust later in life to that, But one of the things that we've always been, I've always been very grateful for, is that he's able to have close, loving relationships with people, and he's able to, he and his girlfriend have been together for 5 or 6 years or something like that, and they have a wonderful relationship where they trust one another, they share their lives together, they're open with one another, they share their goals together, and they're a great team, and I'm grateful because not everybody has that blessing in their life. Not everybody is able to come into their adult years having good, healthy relationships, and maybe they learn them later, or maybe they never learn them. But he may struggle in some other areas, and maybe some of that has to do with his experience growing up. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just like it's in his DNA. It's in it's his personality or whatever. We all go through that. We can look at our own lives and figure that out. But all of this is like, if we're putting this in the context of perfect,
Yes.
there's no roadmap that works for everybody. And if you figure out your roadmap, you're good. I mean, hopefully it's still a work in progress, because that would mean you're still growing and developing. It's almost like maybe perfect just means you're still moving in that direction. You know, you're not stuck. You haven't given up, and you're still moving and you're still growing and changing. Maybe that's what perfection is.
Yeah.
You know, because to feel like we've arrived and we're done, and it's like that can't be it, you know. So maybe perfection is, you know, if you think of like the gifts of the Spirit that get described to us in the New Testament, these are kind of the things that are these alive in your life? Like we talked about patience this morning. Is patience being cultivated in your life? Is generosity, kindness, love, compassion, wisdom, are those things being cultivated in our lives? And are we still growing in those areas? That would be perfect. You know, I think God would look at us and say, you're perfect the way you are. You're perfect just the way you are. I would say that to my kids. You know, it's like I know you have. You know, you're still going to grow. You're going to change. There are some mistakes you've made. There are some things you did that I would have done differently, and vice versa. But you're perfect. You're perfect just the way you are. So it's kind of like that's what I would like to hear from God telling me.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
You know. So, but to think of it as a destination.
No. Well,
I
I want
don't
to
see
say
how.
something about Lila, since I've said she's self-centered.
Balance it out.
She's very good at expressing herself.
Yeah.
And Sherry said to Lila, Oma and I are going to go pick up Papa from the hospital. And of course, she thinks of Pops as dying after he went to the hospital. Hospice brought him home. And they put a bed in the living room. And so when she heard about the hospital, she said, and Sherry looked at Sherry, and Sherry said, well, you know, he's okay, they fixed him. And then she said, well, remember when Pops laid in the bed in the living room, and we were talking and laughing? I want to do that again. So, you know, I feel like that bittersweet feeling she has about life,
Right.
that we all learn from my more communicative children than as I was brought up. It's been a blessing.
There's a difference too when you're not one of many kids the same age in a family growing up. When you are like the only one that age, it makes for a different way to grow up. Usually, those kids tend to be more comfortable with adults. They learn how to express themselves maybe a little bit sooner than others, but at the same time, they're used to being the center of attention, so they just figure that's the way life is. I'm the center of the universe. I mean, that's what everybody around me is telling me. Why would I think differently? I believe what you're telling me.
Watch people on your TV and you think, oh, I'd feel so awkward to have everybody staring at me.
Right. Yeah, and if you grow up, a lot of people grow up, you know, Suli grew up one of 9 kids. You know, she's the middle of 9 kids, and she talks about how she felt sometimes like nobody even recognized her. She's like, do I even exist? You know, so that's the other extreme of the way things can be.
And you have my oldest son at 2 when I had another baby. What did you need him for? You had me.
Yeah,
Said it.
smart. He said what everybody was thinking.
That's right.
Yeah, what did I do wrong that you have to start over again?
Brandon and Brianna, they're 3 years apart, and when Brianna was born, Brandon said, put her back.
Put her back, yeah. This is not going to work for me.
They are authentic.
All right, so let me just go on here to some comments. Thank you guys for hanging in there with us. So it looks like as of a few minutes ago, we're back to being okay. And some comments here. Joy says, we create fear. Okay. This is a good, if we're looking at that statement there, as I would not seem in the words of the psalmist there to tremble for fear where no fear was, that I think that's great, Joy. Joy says we create fear. That's probably a good interpretation of that. Thank you for that. Trust and obey, there's no other way. That's what Ken says. Yes. Yeah. That's moving into that. What are the keys to perfection? Trust and obey that's how we continue to grow, right? And then Paula says, I feel when they say we didn't feel fear before and now we do it because we did not appreciate how awesome God was before. Before now we do. Yeah. So so we've talked about how fear often is described. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That English translation of the word into fear. That's one of the ones that we've used to describe the way that we relate to God. We have a fear of God, and that is we've talked in Bible study a lot of times how maybe a better definition of that is we are in awe of God. God is awesome to us. God is beyond us. We are in awe. And so that's kind of a cousin to fear, or it's a close proximity to see something that is so awe-inspiring, bigger than us, hard to explain, hard to take it in. That kind of borders on fear, because fear is related to the unknown, being overwhelmed, just like instability, those kind of things. So when it comes to our relationship to God and God using this word perfect or not, we might fear or awe may come into this mix. I experienced some of this growing up. I didn't really have it with my mom, but I had it more with my dad. With my mom, I had a very familiar, I can say what's on my mind kind of relationship. With my dad, growing up, for whatever reason, I learned to be choosy with my words, and I didn't just blurt out what I was thinking for whatever reason. Now, my brothers were different. When they came along, they did blurt stuff out. And then they got mad at me because they're like, why do you never get in trouble? I'm like, because I think before I talk. I don't know.
I had trouble with this fearing God and loving God. And I told a minister who was Korean, he's an immigrant, in our last church about that. And he said, well, you don't have an English word for that. In Korean, we have a Korean word that describes that doesn't have to use fear.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah, I guess maybe in cultures where honor and respect is a very highly valued element of their life, a lot of times when you have something that is more central to your culture, then it's more nuanced and it's broader in its meaning and definition. So maybe that's why they could do that. And let me get. I see Bob and Carol. You've had similar experiences with the online thing, but it looks like we're good now. And then Bob says, Lord, give me patience and give it to me now. So we can often feel like that. It's good to grow in all of these gifts of the Spirit, including patience. And then sometimes maybe it is good to recognize how much we have to grow still, Give me patience and give it to me now. why am I not as patient as I should be? You know, that kind
Didn't
of.
marry a tough enough wife. I was raised to be very patient because I had an older sister, 3 years older. She could beat the heck out of me, who flared with her tempers. I learned to be patient, and my husband has reaped the bounty of
Oh, okay.
someone who goes along with him.
Yeah.
But I do sometimes learn. I have learned over the years. I sometimes have to express anger to get my needs met. But not be so patient.
Some of these virtues will come easier to some of us just through like personality type. You know, patience is sometimes connected to like how easily we're agitated about something, and some folks are not easily agitated. You know, it's just like whatever stimulation is going on just doesn't have the same impact. It's almost like Ian has always had this really sensitive hearing, like since he was little. And so he would get bothered by some things that is like, what's the big deal? You know, it's kind of like that, where some of us emotionally, we might be very sensitive, and so it can feel like, well, why am I not patient enough? Well, your experience of that thing bothering you it might hurt you more, or bother you more, or be more irritating to you than it is to somebody else. You know, we could think of it just we have these nerve endings in our skin. Some of us are literally more thick-skinned than others. So, you know, touching somebody is going to feel differently for each person. So that comes into play with what gives us these benefits. Now there's some other things if you're looking for like courage or boldness, which is something that like the Apostle Paul obviously had a lot of. I mean, he had to be this go-getter to travel to all these places and to come up against all these challenges and to be rejected and still to get back up and keep going. It's almost like he needed not to have patience in order to have that. He needed to be irritated to fight and to keep going and to do that kind of a thing. So he may have developed in this way where he has these other gifts of boldness that somebody else might be considered, you know, not as bold because they're more chill, they're more relaxed, they're more patient, or whatever.
That's
You know.
saying patience of a saint. That's my
Okay.
patience of a
Yeah.
saint.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Elaine
Perfect
has
patience.
mentioned that she likes adventure, and my husband rarely does anything get in his way because he loves the adventure.
Right.
And so if he were Paul, he'd just be out there having a good time
Yeah.
messing with those
Right.
folks.
So sometimes we like the excitement and the stimulation and all that. Other people are like, hey, let's not rock the boat here. Let's be thoughtful, you know, let's go. So, all right, so let's keep going here. 4. The perfection of everything which can be measured by the senses is marked off by certain definite boundaries. Quantity, for example, admits both continuity and limitation. A person who looks at the number 10 knows that its perfection consists in the fact that it has both a beginning and an end. But in the case of virtue, we have learned from the apostle that its one limit of perfection is the fact that it has no limit. For that divine apostle, great and lofty in understanding, ever running the course of virtue, never ceased straining toward those things that are still to come. Coming to a stop in the race was not safe for him. Why? Because no good has a limit in its own nature, but is limited by the presence of its opposite. As life is limited by death and light by darkness. And every good thing generally ends with all those things which are perceived to be contrary to the good. All right, so that's one of the reasons why perfection is never really reached or achieved, is because this virtue that we're called to doesn't have a limit. We can always be holier, more sanctified, more perfect, which is silly because the word perfect means that's it, you know? So this maybe, so this is the question then, is that word chosen on purpose? Like when Jesus says, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, it's possible because Jesus was always throwing stuff at us that doesn't seem like it's the right statement. And I think a lot of this is just to continue to kind of get us to think more. So maybe he chose perfect on purpose. Maybe it's not that there was a better word. I've heard this described like when we look at the 7 days of creation, each one of these days is described as ending with God saying, and it was good. It was good. It was good. And then it says that he finished his work. It was complete. So God finished and completed the work. It's done when creation is complete. And what that means is it's perfect. I've heard this word used in, I don't remember if it's Zen. It's another kind of Eastern way of thinking, that if you see, it's almost like if I translate it into Christian language, it would be like saying, if we look at life through the eyes of God, we will see that it is, always was, and always will be perfect. And
perfect is the end. There is nothing better.
Right. And so when we say the past, the present, and the future seen through the eyes of God is perfect, what that would mean is we think it's not perfect. We think there's more to go. But it's not that this world has more to offer and has not reached that place yet. It's that our understanding and our insight is incomplete, is not perfect. And so it's that our perception is what it needs the work to be done. If we could see with God's eyes, we could see like we don't need to strain. We don't need to change. The way God created life to be, this is it.
It's working.
This is it. The kingdom of God is here in your presence today. Look at it and appreciate it for all its glory and its perfection. So some have described the kingdom of God as the kingdom of God is here but not yet, is arrived but not yet. It's perfectly here but not yet. And so there's this tension, and probably I would say the not yet is more likely our eyes don't see it. We're seeing life through a very different perspective than anybody else. We still need to grow in it. So this is saying there's still room for more virtue.
I was befuddled by that last line. Every good thing generally ends with all those things which are perceived to be contrary to good. See, that was another one that got my eye rolling in my head.
Yeah, because no good, capital G, because no good has a limit in its own nature, but is limited by the presence of its opposite, like death life is limited by death, light by darkness. See, this is where we're getting into the limitations of language, and we're kind of exploring the boundaries of the limitations of language, because all language falls short.
symbol of something.
Yeah, it's like in, this is another Buddhist thing. The idea is something like if you are pointing at the moon, don't confuse your finger for the moon. Something like that, right? So the finger would be words, and the moon is the meaning, that deeper thing that we're pointing at. But if you look at it, it's silly because, like, what's a dictionary? Well, a dictionary is like, it's like we're using words to define words.
Yeah.
So it seems like at some point, it's like,
What's the experience?
it's at some point we're just swapping things around. You know, I saw I saw this this guy posted something, and it's kind of this this guy that does kind of deep dives into like who runs the world kind of thing, right? So he put together all these charts of the companies and who owns them. And essentially what he said is when you get to the biggest companies, the companies that own lots of companies, you know, this one company owns thousands of other companies. They're one of the owners. He said when you get to the top, you essentially have the mega owners own one another. So there's not one company that owns everything, but it's like everybody owns a piece of everybody else. So it's kind of like that with language. It's like, in order to understand this word, we use these words, but in order to understand these words, we have to use these words. And at some point, we're using a word to define itself. So this is the limitation of language. And this is kind of what I think he's talking about here when we're talking about we're straining toward good, but like...
Well, he says every good thing
Good.
generally ends with all those things which are perceived to be contrary to good.
perceived to be.
I was
Right.
wondering, is this too, I always try to picture what these guys are talking about. Because they talk in essays.
Yeah.
Is this too worldly? We just have a friend who lost their job. And, everybody was perceiving this as terrible. But he found another job, and it's so much better than the old job.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, gee, you thought perceived this as a terrible thing, but it was a good thing.
Right.
We don't. And I said, well, I guess it's like letting go of a trapeze. If you're a swing when you're a trapeze artist and having to catch the other one, you don't know that you're going to catch it.
Yeah. Yeah, it hit me one day thinking about the Garden of Eden, right?
Yeah.
And how there was no death, supposedly, right? But here's the problem. At least by the way we understand things, everything that we eat
Yeah, that's
has
right.
to die. Everything that we eat has to die. The only way we continue to live is to consume and essentially create or embrace the death of something. And so if it's like that for food, it's like that for other things too. You know, when you're looking at you're doing landscaping in your yard, well, usually the stuff that you put on the plants to make them grow is what comes from dead stuff, because there's these nutrients within those things that are dead that actually are not useful until death occurs, and then they can be absorbed. And so it's like, it's this whole thing of, it's the circle of life. It's the Lion King song. It's the circle of life, where it's like the only life is good, death is bad. That's how we, when we're alive, that's the mantra that we live by. Life is good, death is bad. Life is good, death is bad, right? But we're not really being fully honest about that, because if we didn't have death, we wouldn't be alive, right? I mean, just the fact that, like, the planet isn't growing any bigger, right? If we just never died, eventually we'd run out of space. So we kind of need it. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to look at it. That doesn't mean that when somebody dies or something ends, we say, well, thank God they're dead, unless it's, somebody that we hate or something like that. But that's the thing about virtue. There may be some things that seem virtuous that maybe they're not so virtuous. There may be some things that don't seem so virtuous that end up being
Well, maybe that's the
virtuous.
perfect thing. The life is virtuous, but death is not unvirtuous. It's just another phase.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a little clue to the perfectionism we're looking for.
I think we are supposed to somehow be able to accept both life and death, dark and light. If we can, that's at least philosophically there is some balance there somehow, and Mother Nature or whatever figures out the balance. I mean, the equation balances out. We may not like it. We may try to change it along the way, but eventually the equation balances out. We've called it karma and stuff, and we can, look at it from a moral sense, but essentially, like, physically, philosophically, mathematically, everything balances out. All right, let's keep going and see if we can finish up here this one today. Stopping in the race just at the end of life is the beginning of death. And also, stopping in the race of virtue marks the beginning of the race of evil. Thus, our statement that grasping perfection with reference to virtue is impossible was not false, for it had been pointed out that what has been marked off by boundaries is not virtue. I said that it is also impossible for those who pursue life, the life of virtue, to attain perfection. The meaning of this statement will be explained. The Divine One is himself the good, in the primary and proper sense of the word, whose very nature is goodness. This he is, and he is so named and is known by this nature. Since, then, it has not been demonstrated that there is any limit to virtue except evil, and since the divine does not admit of an opposite, we hold the divine nature to be unlimited and infinite. Certainly, whoever pursues true virtue participates in nothing other than God, because he is himself absolute virtue. Since then, those who know what is good by nature desire participation in it, and since this good has no limit, the participant's desire itself necessarily has no stopping place but stretches out with the limitless. All right. Getting deep and heavy here today. Goodness.
This is doctorate degree level.
Yeah. All right. This is helpful. This is helpful when we think of virtue as a abstract thing. I think that's where we might get into trouble. We think of virtue as some standard, whereas if we think of good or virtue as God's own self, anything that is good is God. Just like we say God is love. So I think we can kind of picture that because the primary way we relate to God is on a personal basis, because that's what comes easiest to us. So we think of God as a person, and we're able to kind of go and take it a little bit into the abstract by saying God is love, not just a person, but God. And not just that God is a loving person, but God is love. So then we start to think, well, what is love? Love is like this energy shared between us. It's this positivity. It's a electricity, a magnetism. It's a good intention. It's a something like that. That's God is that. So that helps us. So what he's saying here is that let's also look not just at love, but let's look at virtue. Goodness. God is goodness. So whenever goodness happens, that means God is happening. You know, it's and think about what is goodness. It's like it's energy, it's your will, it's your intention. It is like focusing your life in a direction. So if we are doing that toward not an abstract end, but we're doing that toward God himself. You know, so it's not even that like a child would imitate a parent. That's kind of the first steps of that. It's like if a parent is a good person and the child imitates the parent, it's like they're mimicking something, they're learning by what they see, but at the same time they're going to see when I do things this way, now I am experiencing what the parent is experiencing. So if I see generosity in the parent, and I see them being very generous with their time and their effort and stuff, and then I start to imitate that and try to be generous myself, and then at some point it'll click. It's like, oh, this is generosity. This is what it means. So then I'm like, I'm not just mirroring and imitating a person, but I've actually entered into generosity. I've actually incorporated the energy and the meaning of generosity into my life. So when it comes to virtue, God is virtue. God is virtuous. God is good. And when we imitate that and try to become like that, we can, by God's grace, start to understand, it is worthwhile for me to practice forgiveness. It is worthwhile for me to think positively and not to always think the worst. It is good for me to love and share my life with people and not be stingy with it, you know? And in that way, I'm starting to experience what it's like to be God. Because I am doing that same thing. And then we're going to go, if we go back to the other part of it, it also means we will start to recognize when we're doing good, and we will benefit from that, and we will hopefully embrace that in our lives. But at the same time, there's always something that's going to tell us, great job, wow, we still have a long way to go too. There's never something that's like, I did it, you know? Finally, I'm God-like. Finally, I'm here, you know?
I like how you put that, though. Yeah.
Imitating.
Yeah.
Jesus is useful for that. If we just had in the Trinity, just God the Creator and Christ, this connecting spirit, it seems like those are less tangible, or you can't visualize. We can't visualize.
And
Jesus.
I don't know, like, because if we look at the way people related to God before Jesus comes on the scene, there are a lot of people that seem to get it and seem to understand it, and then they write about it and things like that. But then there's also a lot of misunderstanding. It's almost like it is good in some ways to put God on a pedestal, to say, I'll never be like that, you know, and God is so beyond and all this. But if we keep God on a pedestal, then we're missing out on the intentions that God had in creating all this to begin with, which was to enter into the same life that God is. You know, so it's here's the part that if you think of all that exists, think of our universe, this life, everything that we can see and that is around us. The Bible uses this phrase a lot, this word "in," that little preposition. It basically saying like, we are currently in God. This is where we live. This is where we are. And so there's a part of our brain that tells us, no, that's not right. God's over there outside, and then this is some neutral playground that is temporary, you know? And so there's this separation. It's like little me, big playground of reality, and then God outside of reality. And then sometime God comes to the playground and plays around with us or whatever. But what I think they were trying, the people that were kind of understanding it in the Old Testament before Jesus, what they were pointing to, what Jesus was pointing to, is we keep getting asked to come in and say, this is not just a playground. This is the reality of the presence of God. This is actually, we're swimming in the essence of God right now. And so if our eyes can be open to that awareness, we can start to see like that we really take our individual existence and separation so seriously that we do make ourselves into something that is beyond God. Almost like we think we could exist without swimming in God, without swimming in the essence of God. So this thing of virtue, maybe what it is it's like we're being beckoned to understand more deeply and more fully where we really are right now. And we're trying to get on the same frequency as God, and we're trying to live like God does, so that all of this can be more alive to us than it was before. You know, so it's not like an illusion. All right, so let's look at 6.
You gonna try?
I guess we're a little over, aren't we? Okay, we'll have to end with 6. The unattainable commandment, it is therefore undoubtedly impossible to attain perfection, since, as I have stated, perfection is not marked off by limits. The one limit of virtue is the absence of a limit. How then would one arrive at the sought-for boundary when he can find no boundary? Although on the whole, my argument has shown that what is sought for is unattainable, one should not disregard the commandment of the Lord, which says, therefore be perfect just as your heavenly Father is perfect. For in the case of those things which are good in nature, even if men of understanding were not able to attain everything, by attaining even a part, they could yet gain a great deal. So that's a good place to end. It's like it can seem like if it's not attainable, why are we even bothering? You know, it makes us feel like we're the donkey and we're getting the carrot, you know, dangled in front of us, and like we're never gonna get it. You know, but we keep trying and trying. But those analogies are not. They fall short. It's more like there's this exciting journey that we're on, and it's just going to keep getting more exciting. It's going to keep getting better. It's going to become more complex. It's just we're not going to want it to end. You know, how disappointing is it when you're in a great story? You know, I mean, it's good to come to an end because we need to move on with our lives or whatever. But if you're reading a great story, or you're watching a great story, you know, you want to keep turning the pages, and when you get to the end, usually there's this sense of like, I kind of wish it wasn't over.
Yeah, I
You
that
know,
feeling.
I know it has to end just because all good things have to come to an end or whatever. But that's the thing that we're invited to come into, is there's this thing called virtue and perfection. So let's get into it and let's let it take over and let's just keep going with it. And perfection is just, you just don't quit reading. You just don't quit, moving forward. And it's not that we're trying to reach something. If we were like, oh, finally, I found the buried treasure, now it's over. It's that. No, that's the whole thing is treasure. Every day is treasure. There's more. I think that's kind of the virtue that we're talking about, that God is. And there are probably many ways where we limit that. It's so boring sometimes to think of heaven as a final destination. It's because it's like, I don't think we have any final destinations. Unless heaven is just a doorway of some sorts. And it's a doorway to a never-ending story, a never-ending land. Then I can get excited about that. But to be like, we made it to paradise and it's over. It's like, ugh.
Don't let that.
That would be hell. We're stuck in a weird box. Just happens to be really cool and comfy. Did we have?
I'm gonna say something.
Yep.
after.
Okay. All right. Send us out in the power of your Spirit, Lord. May our lives bring Jesus to the world. May each thought and word bring glory to your name. Send us out in your Spirit, Lord, we pray. Send us out in the power of your Spirit, Lord. May our lives bring Jesus to the world. May each thought